COVID-19 pandemic has changed remarkably in the past 3 years, and we really need to change too, we think. So, as you know, we set out to facilitate relevant research to guide the emergency response to COVID-19 in low resource settings. We wanted to reduce barriers and obstacles to urgently needed research and act as a forum for discussion and a source of relevant documents and information and so forth. In some areas we succeeded and in some we failed. And now we want your views on how we should proceed in the future. So the agenda is before you. Yet again, welcome to everyone. The meeting is divided in basically 2 sections. One is some presentations from our working groups, who are the key engine of our coalition. An introduction to our new host, the PANTHER coalition, which will be introduced by Dr. Nathalie Strub-Wourgaft, who's one of the founding members of and member of the Secretariat. And then we will have a discussion about the coalition transition, during which you will have the opportunity to vote on a number of options as to how we should proceed. So next slide, please. Just a little bit, the next one, please. A few housekeeping points to start with. So the meeting is recorded and we will publish a link soon. Please ask questions via the question and answer tool, which is at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote for, or you can recommend or otherwise people's questions by clicking on the thumbs icon, but that's the medium for the questions, not the chat. Please could you, if you are asking a question, let us know which who it's addressed to, in other words, which working group speaker. And at the end, we'll ask you to fill in a short survey, if you would be so kind. Next, please. So during the discussion at the end, which should be about 30 minutes, we will definitely finish on time. Raise your hand if you actually would like to speak. So you can either write questions down or just raise your hand and then unmute yourself, and if possible, turn on the camera so we can see when the moderator calls you. And clearly, with so many people online, organization is going to be a little bit difficult, but I guess you've all done Zooms before, and we'll try and make it reasonably well organized. If you've got technical difficulties, email. The email address is up there in the middle. And then, of course, those of you who are in social media, do tweet and tell everyone about this. Next, please. So briefly, an introduction first to our steering committee and then to our secretariat. This is our steering committee. Elvis Temfak from Africa CDC has just joined. Helen Rees from South Africa. Professor Abul Faiz from Bangladesh. Professor Patty Garcia from Peru. Philippe Guérin, currently in Oxford, Nathalie Strub-Wourgaft, who is based with DNDi and will now be moving to the PANTHER coalition, and myself, I'm Nick White, I'm based here in Thailand. And then our secretariat, in the next slide, headed by Amina, who is our coordinator, assisted by Mireille, Brenda, Maureen, and 2 other very important ambassadors. Next, please. So we hope to be as representative as possible. We aim to be as representative as possible. We've got more than 1,000 institutional members and individual members from a total of 98 countries, and 3/4 of those are from low middle income countries. Next, please. So this is our rough organogram. There are 7 active groups who meet together and discuss, and you'll be hearing from several of these. And then there are 7 advisory groups who are reactive to the needs and can be called upon for their advice and consideration. So next, please. I'll just show you the diagram in a slightly different one I wrote. That's coming a bit later. So we're now going to go to individual presentations from 6 of the working groups. And the first one will be from Professor Juan Carlos Villar from Colombia. He co-chairs the clinical epidemiology working group. Over to you, Professor Juan Carlos.
Thanks, Professor White. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we hear you and see you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm presenting on behalf of our working group, especially on behalf of my co-chair, Dr. Richard Mode, and our coordinator, Dr. Luz Angela Torres. We may start by highlighting our achievements, being the first and foremost that we have been keeping the group together despite the challenge of meeting with a number of people you have never met personally and that you know only by virtual teleconference. We have held 50 working group meetings so far, and we have managed to keep the contacts with 17 members in total. 7 from Latin America, 1 from the USA, 4 from Africa, 3 from Europe, and 2 from Asia. And we have served the coalition as a whole by organizing many sharing sessions regarding projects, proposals, and regarding also presentations of our thoughts and directions, and inviting guest speakers. Oops. Okay, this is just an overview of the 4 meetings that have been open to all coalition members on different topics on COVID, and then long COVID or post-COVID conditions. And we could say we haven't missed any of the really leading studies that are showing us the lead on what is known, what is being discovered in COVID first, and then the definition, the working definition of the post-COVID condition, and then the assessment of the burden, of the magnitude of the problem, and then the different manifestations of the condition. We have had a process where we have been trying different paths. We started by having a prioritization exercise, trying to identify the questions that were more important for us at the moment, and we worked in work documents. We tried to publish some of them. We just had a letter to editor published on long COVID. But going back to the slide in the right-hand side, we started a post-COVID condition pilot project. We developed protocol, case report forms, tried to invite different centers to join. We prepared statements on preparedness for post-COVID conditions, trying to collect the working members' perspectives. And most of all, I think we have hosted a room for ideas and to have a learning experience based on the studies that other groups and our groups have had, and we have created a space for us to share our results, our thoughts, and also to present the main studies that have been held in the field. And lastly, we finally had a few post-COVID condition research projects that received small funding from our own countries. And this is also to highlight what is in the across the slide in the bottom, that we have all the time search for funding opportunities so our group can have some support and also some stability to work out ideas and to keep us together as a group. This is just like to highlight the two projects, the next two slides. The first one is from Colombia. It's basically a project where we are going to first identify individuals who with past story of COVID, with long COVID, so we can sort of provide an estimate of incidence and coin the definition and try to get some guidelines on the definitions locally, and also run a clinical trial that is not on any medication so far, but just on rehab therapy for occupational therapy and physical therapy to look at functional outcomes. And it has received a local funding for the city of Bogota, around $120, something like that. And the other project is a project led by Richard Moat, our co-chair, on mental health in Thailand, the mental health and long COVID, looking at the impact of COVID-19 in mental health. And this will be a pilot to try to emphasize on and how to detect reliably mental illness. And the project got local funding for that, and it looks forward to run an observational study to describe that burden, and then to run a randomized trial on community interventions. This is the dream of that project. And just a few thoughts to end my participation. It looks very much like one of those good intentions books, where active participation is essential, where where we should highlight how the group has behaved, and in terms of keeping together, in terms of not losing hope, but in trying to struggle to get some work together and get projects to be funded, etc. And that has been a challenge throughout the time of the coalition. The shared ownership of ideas and the getting that ideas exchange has been very important, and also the triangulation. Just to finish with that, the triangulation between getting local funding, keeping the support from the coalition for the coordination and perhaps some pilot work, and finally try to get some real funding, just as we have all wanted for the work, the research work in the LMICs. That is very important. I hope the working group, the clinical epidemiology working group, can regain some momentum, and with this assembly can go ahead and go for more work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Juan Carlos. There aren't any pressing questions in the Q&A at the moment, but if you have questions for Juan Carlos, or indeed any of the speakers, do put them in the Q&A, and we will relay those in the question and answer session at the end. So now we go to Professor Phaik Yeong, Cheah. She chairs the data sharing working group. Phaik Yeong, over to you.
Oh God, this came as a shock.
It did, yes.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Phaik Yeong, Working Group Chair for the Data Sharing Working Group. Next slide, please. So Faith, who's the working group coordinator, is going to help me by sharing a few related links throughout the conversation. So yeah, Faith, just get ready. So we will ask if working group achievements, challenges, and lessons learned, first of all. So for the data sharing working group, in my opinion, the most significant achievement is that we have created a network for those interested in the ethical and governance aspects of data sharing. So that includes data managers, those interested in the ethical aspects of data sharing, governance aspects of data sharing, operational aspects of data sharing. We've done many webinars, many papers written by working group members. Many of them have arose from a project that we got funding as a working group in 2020, but papers on related projects too. So we won't list them here in this presentation, but Faith will share a report in the chat. So it's got details of our activities and publications, etc. Challenges. Webinars, they're really good and they can reach many people and raise many issues and a really good platform for us to share our new projects. But as you know, discussions during these webinars are at a general level, which means discussions are not very in-depth, because webinars are meant to be short, highly curated, and rehearsed. That's the first challenge, is regarding webinars. And the second one is that it's hard to define our achievements because as a working group, because many of us have our own projects. These are really good stuff, benefited from discussions in the working group. But it is quite challenging to attribute the work of the data sharing working group because the work is not funded specifically by funds raised as part of the working group. Because for many of us, we do this work as part of our jobs. So what I'm saying is the working group doesn't necessarily get credit for the work that we individually do as part of our jobs. And we has benefited, but it's not clear. So when we want to characterize impact or achievements, it's quite hard to do in that sense. So what role does the coalition in general can play to support the working group and its objective? Two immediate ideas have come to mind. The first is because I mentioned the limitation of webinars. So what I want to propose is a 2 to 3 day workshop face-to-face if possible on data sharing with other working group leads, steering committee, and others who are really interested. So maybe 30 or 40 people. We should have in-depth discussions and sessions and to talk about these persistent problems and how to amplify the use of solutions that already exist or refine those in development by people or by working group members. And I'll talk about some of them later. We could really benefit from interactions with data-rich groups, the primary data generators of those working on RCTs as well as data reusers. The coalition is planning some cross-working group sessions. A dedicated coalition session just to talk about data sharing would be really nice. Well, you say, what, a whole session just on data sharing, you may ask? But well, why not? One of our aims of the coalition is to promote data sharing. So I think it's worth investing the time. Next slide, please. So we have still, this problem still persists, lack of sharing, but also lack of reuse. And to remind everyone, our working group objective is to promote efficient, ethical, and equitable data sharing. It's not only efficiency or utility of the data, we want to make sure we are ethical and equitable as well. We have made some progress, no doubt. We have a platform for data sharing, for example, EDO. So Faith will share the page. And we have done quite well with managed access system. We've had quite a lot of data access committees where you apply for data using an application form to a committee and then you get reviewed. But we also have a lot of problems that we haven't resolved. For example, how not to exacerbate existing inequalities. So we want to promote utility and efficiency, but not at all costs. We want to promote equitable, ethical, and efficient data sharing. There are 3 E's. So we want to have fair attribution to the data generators. How do we give credit to primary data generators? How do we maximize impact of data sharing? To what extent do academic papers arising from secondary data translate to improvement in health and saving lives? And there are also technical issues, and I won't go into them there, in terms of the operational aspects. And last but not least, we're battling with anonymization. So anonymization is a very, very, very high threshold, high standard to achieve, because with the current technology, it is possible to piece together de-identified information from several places to re-identify people. If data is not truly anonymized, then data protection laws are effective. So we have lots more work to do. And last but not least, I'll ask Phaik to share a call for papers in a special edition. Right, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Thanks very much, Phaik Yeong. We're fortunate Tanusha has rejoined us, sorted out the communication problem, I hope. So back to Tanusha, Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Working Group. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, that's great. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Tanusha Ramdin. I'm a neonatologist pediatrician from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I work at an academic hospital called Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital. Next slide, please. So we thought that it was quite important to address issues that occurred during COVID, especially pertaining to your pregnant woman, unborn children, and children as well. Next slide, please. So one of our earlier working projects we published in +1. It was the topic was global research priorities for COVID-19 in maternal, reproductive, and child health. It was it was a survey done in 29 countries, and basically it was a research project looking for the need where we need to focus our impacts of COVID-19 on pregnant women, neonates, and children. Next slide, please. So our current project is actually, we would like to ask the question, have COVID-19 lockdown restrictions caused an increase in the role of adolescency pregnancy? As we know, many adolescents and young children likely to have been affected indirectly by the pandemic, and lockdown restrictions have caused disruption to education and sexual and reproductive health service across the globe. One particular country, Sierra Leone, adolescent pregnancies has increased by 65%. That's enormous during the Ebola crisis. And a similar trend may have occurred in some countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was felt by many of our group members, that there was an increase in adolescent pregnancy rates in individual local countries. Next slide, please. Why is it important? We know that early childbearing or pregnancies can have a long-lasting effects during the adolescent period and can derail girls' otherwise healthy development into adulthood and have negative impacts on their education, livelihood, and health. They may be forced to drop out of school, long-reaching impacts, which results as not being educated, as well as future employment opportunities, as well as social consequences. Next slide, please. Next slide. It also impacts largely your maternal health and increases deaths among girls between the ages of 15 and 19 years old. Neonatal outcomes may also be affected. That includes higher preterm deliveries, low birth weights, stillbirths, and mortality. Next slide, please. Examples of this, UNICEF has reported a 20% spike in the last 15 months in teenage pregnancies. And in Malawi itself, 13,000 girls got pregnant and 40,000 marriages occurred before children's 18 years birthdays. Next slide, please. Over 30% of women surveyed in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe weren't able to access the family planning services that they required, and economic hardship may be leading to more transactional sex. Next slide, please. The epidemiology picture regarding teenage pregnancies is not clear, and early reports of significant pandemic-related spikes in adolescent pregnancies may not be reliable. So this is the reason and a great opportunity to produce good quality data. Next slide, please. So our research involved is a systematic review. We reviewed multiple databases, including English, French, and Spanish, and the protocol is available on Prospo. Next slide, please. The review of the literature, many articles were reviewed, not only in English, but as you can see, many other Spanish and French languages. And at the moment, we're sitting about 105 articles that we wanting to include in our publication. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Two important papers that highlighted the problem of adolescent pregnancies was in Kenya, as well as national data from your DHS. Next slide, please. This is quite reassuring. This graph shows that actually after the COVID pandemic, there has been a decrease in pregnancy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And concurrently with the systematic review, we're doing a survey as well. Next slide, please. And to summarize finally, so a lot of literature and reports saying what the impact of the pandemic might be, but there's little data that actually presents to the state what is actually happening or in real time. So we eagerly await new data, new prospective data, or retrospective data. I would like to thank my working group. I would like to thank Lauren Hookham, who is our research leader or coordinator. She's put a lot of hard work and effort in our recent publication. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tanusha. Glad we could reconnect. Our next talk is from Dr. Wilber Sabiiti, who's the co-chair of the Virology, Immunology, and Diagnostics Working Group. Wilber.
Can I
Again, yeah, we hear you now, Wilber.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for all who have come to be with us in this members' assembly. So I'll be speaking on behalf of the Virology, Immunology, and Diagnostics Working Group. So our remit as a working group was to assess the effect of the virus dynamics, on the immunology and the diagnostics that were being put forward to diagnose COVID-19. We were also interested in how the emerging variants of the virus were affecting diagnostics or the vaccines that were made. So we have been able to keep regular working group meetings, average attendance of around 50%. We were able to identify the priority research areas in the biobanking and sequencing, for which we developed into a research proposal. And we're still seeking funding for this proposal to be effected. So we also did a review of COVID-19 testing guidelines, because we felt countries had used different approaches to diagnose or respond to COVID-19. And we wanted to make a one-stop archive that has these guidelines and make sense of how countries approach the diagnosis of COVID-19. So far, we've created this database of all the global testing guidelines, especially focusing on the low and middle income countries. And we presented an abstract at the Africa CDC conference, whereby we got very good reviews and comments from the Africa CDC management and other participants who turned up. And we are translating this information into a manuscript that we hope to publish in peer-reviewed journal. So, as I mentioned, we did participate in the second international conference on public health in Africa in Kigali, Rwanda. And we gave a presentation on streamlining disease surveillance across Africa by building biobanking and sequencing capacity, and emphasized the role of partnership in achieving this objective, because there is a lot of work being done, bits here and there, especially in the space of whole genome sequencing, but it's not well coordinated. And we think partnerships may be good to be able to build synergies and enhance the impact. And also issues like ethics of data that is generated are quite important to be addressed at national and international levels. We also presented our abstract, which was turned into a poster. And in this poster, we showed that having testing guidelines increased the rate at which the COVID was tested in different countries. So the message was that the earlier the guidelines are put in place, the better for responding to pandemics. We've also published a paper. We did a survey of COVID diagnostics access and uptake in number of LMICs. And we published this paper showing that there was inequity in terms of access and uptake of COVID-19 diagnostics that did not favor the low and middle income countries. So the challenges have been really difficult in accessing funding, especially in the space of biobanking and sequencing. The research proposal we developed is still somewhere and we're still hoping we shall get funding for it to take it forward. The member attendance has a little bit decreased, and this we think is because there hasn't been active research that is being done by the group itself, and maybe some members felt they had some better things to do instead of just attending meetings without getting their hands dirty with some ongoing research. So the lessons we have learned is that the need for research capacity building is still high in low and middle income countries because there are still fundamental areas that tend to be glossed over, and this is the role of this coalition to make sure that we point to these fundamental issues and find ways of addressing them before the next pandemic turns up. We have interacted with stakeholders who are in the biobanking and sequencing space, and now we know how we can build synergies with those stakeholders. For example, we've been in touch with the Africa CDC Pathogen Genomics Initiative, and they have indicated to us the need for training epidemiologists and bioinformaticians who are needed to analyze data that comes out of genome sequencing. And we think that's an area we could work together to develop. And we think synergy is better than duplication and competition. So there is a lot of work going around. So we would save our energy and money by not duplicating or competing, but building synergies and creating bigger impact. We are better off doing coordination. I think as a coalition, as a working group, I think we can do better in coordinating response. For example, spearheading political standardization, so that when countries are responding, they have like one standard protocol that they are following, and that helps in terms of comparing or generalizing data that is generated in different countries. So going forward, we hope to lobby for funding to support the working group activities and support grant applications and management. That is linkage with potential collaborators, and also the Secretariat can assist in identifying grant calls and working group that can apply, that they can apply for, and also establish a framework for managing grants. So if we go for grants as a coalition, how do we manage them? And that's a question that's yet to be answered, whether the Secretariat has the capacity or whether members will manage grants right from their organizations where they are affiliated or where they are employed. Thank you, and I think that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Wilber. Our next speaker is Professor Shelley Lees, who is the co-chair of the Social Science Working Group. Shelley.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so I think one of the successes of our working group has to achieve quite a wide geographical basis for our membership. And as you can see, we have members from West Africa, East and Southern Africa, Latin America, United States, Asia, and Europe. And as with other working groups, we have variously had we've been meeting once a month since the beginning of the coalition. And we've had various memberships. Sometimes we have a lot of us attending, other times less so, but that really reflects the fact that people are really busy. But I guess the positive thing about that is everybody's, all the members of the working group are really busy doing interesting research, and that's really contributed a lot to the discussions that we've had within the working group. And another point I saw Gustavo mention, and something we have been discussing, is whether we have the capacity to join other one of us to join other working groups to ensure that social science perspectives are reflected upon in all the working groups. Next slide. So for the first year of the working group, we really had a lot of discussions about what the priorities were from a social science perspective and how we could contribute to thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic globally. And we actually managed to write a commentary on the key priorities that we had identified for the for response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And our priorities very much focused on sort of politics, economics, history, and social aspects of COVID-19, and particularly how global and local inequality shaped both the ways in which responses to COVID-19 were put in place, but also to people's own experiences of the pandemic, and particularly inequalities in illnesses. Number of us in the working group have been doing anthropological research around clinical trials, and so we really wanted to continue that work, particularly with the rapid setup of COVID-19 clinical trials. So we wanted to look at particularly about, again, issues around equality and fair distribution of the products that are developed during clinical trials, particularly vaccines, but also looking at the ways in which communities are involved and engaged with the trials that are being set up in their communities. We focused also on transnationalism and the idea of the ways in which a number of countries took a very nationalistic approach, particularly to vaccine development and distribution, but also the ways in which borders were closed down, the effects of that. And then finally, health-seeking behaviour, and particularly issues around trust and uncertainty affecting health-seeking. So that was our priorities. Next slide. I'm just going to rush through our priorities moving forward. As the coalition is thinking about this, we are also thinking about widening how we can wider focus on whether it's a focus on infectious diseases, including AMR, and focus on pandemic preparedness. Louisa Enria, who's in the audience, is doing a really interesting study on interdisciplinarity and really exploring challenges and opportunities of interdisciplinary collaboration, using the coalition as a starting point to explore perceptions of coalitions and collaborations and how North-South partnerships work. And then we are moving a lot of our focus to what many of the lessons we've learned from the COVID-19 around structural inequalities. We have a special edition where we're going to be focusing on global vaccine equity and therapeutic inequities and availabilities, and looking at a decolonizing approach. Next slide. So for the next steps for us is we're going to engage in the priority setting exercise, and we are working within our group discussions to do a wider survey of other social sciences scientists we're connected with, and we are planning to publish a piece on social science priorities for pandemic preparedness. And so we have a lot of planning this year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shelley. So the next presentation is a joint presentation between Mauro Teixeira, who co-chairs the Therapeutics Working Group, and Joel Tarning, who chaired the Clinical Pharmacology Group, which has hybridized with the Therapeutics Working Group. So over to Mauro and Joel.
Thank you, Professor White. So it's a pleasure to be here. Our Therapeutics Working Group has been established not long ago, and we are a fairly small group of people at this stage. So please do join us if you're interested in the topic. So I co-chair the Therapeutics Working Group with Professor Phaik at Liverpool. And as Nick has just said, we've been merged with the Clinical Pharmacology Working Group in the last month or so. So the idea of the working group is to provide advice on and guidance on new therapeutics for COVID in a broad way that is applicable. And it was really nice to see the social science work group actually tackling some of the discussions we've had in terms of actually having therapeutics that are the ones needed for low resource settings. So we would like to advocate on how to do the best therapeutic research that will generate the most relevant evidence, and to actually have more research into therapeutics and equitable access to therapeutics, not only when they are available, but as we are doing the research itself, so that the drugs, when available, they are actually valuable for low resource settings. And we've been trying to generate evidence based on this idea on low resource settings. Next slide, I think I can do it. No, I can't. Okay, thank you. So I will pass on to Joel. He will actually describe some of the work the working group, the clinical pharmacology working group has been doing. So yeah, keep that slide, please. Joel, come in, please.
Thanks, Mauro. If I can have the next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the key learning aspects that we looked at the clinical pharmacology group before the merger. So we all know that developing and evaluating novel compounds and drugs for the treatment or prophylaxis of emerging infectious diseases is very costly and time-consuming, and practically impossible in a fast-emerging pandemic. And repurposing of available marketed drugs is an appealing option, as they already have an established safety profile. And this results in a substantially reduced cost and also time required to make these effective treatments available in the marketplace. So many of the drug candidates, the challenge was that many drug candidates showed efficacy in vitro experiments, but in the end failed to deliver their effect in clinical trials when evaluated. So clearly we need better approaches to evaluate in vitro data. So we developed a simple pharmacometric simulation-based approach to evaluate in vitro activity data in combination with expected clinical trial exposure that was simulated, in order to evaluate the likelihood of achieving effective concentrations in patients from their repurposed medicine. So this pharmacometric approach then bridges the in vitro activity data to the clinical exposures, and it could be a very useful complement to other methods in order to prioritize drugs to be tested in clinical trials for COVID-19. So using this framework and approach, we demonstrated that molnupiravir is likely to reach therapeutic levels, and that the simulated clinical concentrations that we saw was well above the plasma protein corrected IC90 from in vitro trials. So therefore, we think that this drug has an effect and has a likelihood to reach therapeutic levels, as then was shown in clinical trials. We also showed that favipiravir might reach effective concentrations early on after loading dose, but very quickly loses that by having declining drug concentrations with time. So that is probably not an effective effective medicine in our simulation platform. We also showed that ivermectin do not generate clinically relevant concentrations, and that the clinical concentrations that was simulated did not reach the expected IC50 for therapeutic efficacy against COVID. I've listed some of the highlights in papers 1 to 7 on the bottom, if you can read that, and we can also post that in the chat for those that are interested to read more of these challenges and lessons learned from the clinical pharmacology working groups. So thanks, and over to you again, Mauro.
Thank you, Joel. Next one, please. Oh, it is there. Okay, so I think, we've been facing a lot of challenges in COVID related to therapeutics research. And I would like to highlight a few, and how we are trying to tackle that within our group. The lack of accepted pharmacometrics methods for drug evaluation. In vitro, Joel has mentioned some of that, but also in vivo. And I will post at chat a recent study actually headed by Nick White in Thailand that we have contributed. We do need new ways of actually developing new therapeutics, especially because endpoints are not so realistic anymore as the pandemic evolves. Viruses are less virulent or apparently less virulent as the degree of immunization is very high. A very important point is inequity in access to new therapeutics by communities. Not only therapeutics that have been approved, but actually to do research with these new therapeutics has been extremely difficult in low resource settings, not only because richer countries hoard or keep all the drugs, but they actually fail to make these drugs available for independent evaluation. So I think these are very important points that we are trying to tackle. Next one, please. And the idea is that we are in the process. I mean, we've been created less than a year ago, and we are actually generating the evidence, papers, and manuscripts that actually relate to the points raised before. So endpoints is a very crucial discussion that we are having, and hopefully we'll be submitting some work fairly shortly on that. And the idea is that we need to tailor these endpoints to be very objective and actually have a safety issues related to the population of interest. Having definitions that are robust, realistic, feasible, and informative for policy making. We need to have the relevant populations in their relevant settings, in the relevant way that we're going to be treating these individuals, so that any findings not only generalizable, sorry for saying that, to the richer countries, but also for low resource settings. And keeping in mind that low resource settings are different across the globe. And that's why we do need a global strategy. And we do need to keep in mind that there is difficulty in defining what's a normal range for safety and even efficacy of certain drugs in the non-Caucasian populations worldwide. So I will end by saying that we do need a global strategy for evaluation of new therapeutics. We are trying to provide evidence in terms of discussions of endpoints, advocacy papers, and position papers on the subject that we hope to be available soon to the group. I think I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mauro, and thank you, Joel. We're now going to have a presentation from Nathalie. She is one of our steering committee members, but she's also the general delegate for the Pandemic Preparedness Platform for Health and Emerging Infections, which we call PANTHER. In fact, she has started this initiative, and we're very grateful to PANTHER because they've generously agreed to be a home for us. So Nathalie is going to tell us about this new exciting initiative. Over to you, Nathalie.
Thank you, Nick. Can I have the slides, please? Aha. Thank you. Very good. So here's our PANTHER, vigilant and able to react quickly. So why did we build this? So a bit of background. I think everything we heard just before is just setting the scene of all the lessons we have learned, including ourselves doing a study called Anti-Cov. We've seen that we succeeded in some aspects, but we were really failing everywhere to have the right response for all the regions of the world. And this is part of what created the idea of PANTHER. So really to address and to respond to needs in a different way. And this is done in the context of a very evolving landscape, where I think the global community recognizes that global doesn't mean, needs to be supported by local data, and the leadership of low and middle income countries of low resource settings has to be in the decision-making process. You cannot just apply a solution from one area of the world, the North, in what people call the South. So we have to change a bit the way of working. This is happening at the time where WHO just this week again is discussing a treaty or a pandemic accord or some sort of new ways of addressing pandemics. EU has set up the Health Emergency Response Authority. Africa is discussing a preparedness treaty, and Africa CDC is now set as an agency to take decisions and be ruling some of the important decisions. So there is an evolving landscape. So obviously, initiatives already exist to address some of those questions, but we feel there was a need to work a bit differently and have identified what we think are important differentiating factors. The first one is that the priorities that will be discussed through PANTHER will not be the PANTHER priorities, but they will be public health defined priorities, including by Africa CDC that released their pathogen list just yesterday, day before, the WHO R&D blueprint, of course, as well as AFRO and EMHO. Because again, there might be some regional priorities that might not be global and do need to be addressed. The other piece is that we want the decisions to be very much made by low and middle income countries. We think we have to bring to the table the idea of sustainable funding, inter-crisis model, or if you wish, no regret funding, even if you may not have to, we hope you don't have to respond to a pandemic, you still need to invest to be prepared for that pandemic. The last 2 points is that there's a need to work in outpatient settings. There's also a need to do very complex, solid phase 2 proof of efficacy studies, such as those that were just presented by the previous team, but also there needs to be response in the setting where the first outbreaks may hit, meaning in outpatients. And of course, we'll have to do probably some very complex clinical trials. So this is our board members. I'm sorry, it's a little small. The map is here to illustrate the regions of the world where the board members come from. So you can see the list on the left. We also have Africa CDC as a voting member, as well as Africa EU NEPAD agency that is represented at the board. And not by chance, we have invited Nick to be part of the board as an observer to make the link between the coalition and PANTHER, because we think that whatever the funding streams, there will be some interest for all of us to link of what we do in PANTHER and what the coalition does, or vice versa. I'll come to that in a minute. So, and EMHO and AFRO are also represented to our board as observers. So the vision is really to help to contribute to the control of future emerging epidemics or pandemics through something that will be very agile and flexible, a clinical research platform response that will support controlling some emerging infectious diseases via the development of diagnostic treatment or vaccines, and a focus on low and middle income countries, and I would like to say first Africa. So PANTHER will focus very much on Africa. And we will do that by bringing and preparing and bringing human and technical infrastructure in the existing centers, and working very closely with probably the NPHIs, which are now being set with Africa CDC. So the way we work is that we will have what starts to exist, which are hubs, which are, if you wish, centers of excellence or reference centers, but at least centers in different countries that will be fully equipped to conduct research either in their own community or have access to external centers, outpatient centers. But to be functional, those hubs will need to have all those competencies that we have listed here. I'd like to insist as well that the community engagement will be very key, especially if we think about outpatients, something that we may not have put a lot or enough emphasis in our response up to now, at least for some of us. So this tries to show the galaxy in which those hubs will be operating. So you can see that they might work with NGOs, with epidemiology surveillance hubs that may be integrated, may not, because everything will be à la carte, if you wish, depending on the countries already, how advanced they are, how they are set up. This is not going to be something artificial that we plug. We would just want to integrate some kind of sustainable ways of working where legal agreements and many things will be in place, including connections with regulators. We all know how that has been quite complicated with logistics to get drugs cleared at the customs, things which are very both on the logistical side, very basic, but very important, can be bottlenecks, but also more scientific with academia or more political with ministries of health. That all will be part of the galaxies. And as I mentioned on the slide, with national public health institutes, as they are being set in Africa. So there will be two types of activities. One that will be the more business as usual on the right side of the slide, which is really once you have been ready, you have prepared yourself. People like to talk about 80% ready. You just need to pivot to the 20% and run your research. But meanwhile, there will be a lot of things to prepare on. So things on priority settings, of course, mapping expertise, HR needs, HR training needs, stuff that needs to be in place. So a lot of capacity building there. Then a huge set of things for clinical trial operational preparedness, 80% ready protocols, pre-approved protocols, CRFs, legal agreements, data sharing agreements. So Phaik mentioned this, it is so central. Coordination mechanisms, legal agreements, financial agreements, a lot of things that we can do now, and that can be either used for a specific disease or even some of it will be disease agnostic. And having a financial model for inter-crisis period. So I'm almost finished. This is a tentative description of where we are now. So as mentioned before, we have some agnostic, non-disease specific activities on mapping, on preparedness, operational, as I mentioned, legal, financial, training, and administrative. That is happening now. And we also have, based on several diseases, some activities that will be preparing sites, preparing studies on one side and responding on the other side. So we have some work ongoing on disease preparedness on Lassa fever with the Integrate Consortium. And we're doing this in Nigeria, Benin, and Liberia and Guinea. And they will will conduct the study in Nigeria. On Mpox, we have a study called MOSA that can start in some countries, but needs to be prepared for in other countries because only small cases are being detected as of now. But that's the whole thing. It may explode, and that's when you want to be ready. That's the principle. We'll see about flu, and we may relaunch anti-CoV to be confirmed. So the last point, which is really for today as well, is what is the connection with the coalition? So I think the richness of the coalition is that we think it can help PANTHER. On the other hand, maybe we'll get some science through some of those diseases that we can continue to share with the coalition members. And you know, I can think of one disease where we might have, you know, PANTHER being engaged in one disease, but the coalition researchers might be interested to conduct it in other regions. And we can think of CCHF, for example. So, and we will have some connections, I hope, between the two groups. And then, of course, the working groups will help the coalition very importantly. And just now, everything I heard is, you know, is very key, including long viral disease consequences. And what PANTHER can do is just bring some sustainable funding without having any, and I think that's quite important. So the choices made by the working groups, etc., won't change. This is an independent group, the coalition. There is a funding link. That's it. And that's how we want to continue to fund the secretariat, in fact, to continue to animate and facilitate the activities of the working groups and of the coalition in general. So I think that's it for now. And thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Nathalie. And thank you again for hosting us as PANTHER. But just to emphasize that although PANTHER's primary focus is on Africa, we intend to remain a global coalition. So next part of our meeting really is to think how we are going to be in the future. So the working groups or representatives of the working groups met together, I think it was last October, really just to reflect on whether we should continue at all. The general consensus was that we should. We still had a raison d'etre, although the pandemic had changed dramatically in the course of the 2 years. So now I'm just going to rehearse what our principles are, or what we think they should be, and then to present some options to you for the future, and you will have the opportunity to vote on those. So next slide, please. So our mission statement to advocate and collaborate.
Nick, sorry to interrupt, but there were 2 questions for Nathalie as well for the PANTHER presentation.
Okay, let's just hold those because we've held all other questions. Let's hold those, and I'll come back to those if I may.
Perfect.
So our mission statement, I think, is still relevant, and that is to advocate and collaborate for the advancement of COVID-19 research, driven by the needs of people in low resource settings, and to strive for equitable access to solutions in the global response to the pandemic, something that we strive for but have not, as you know, well known, achieved. Next slide. Thanks. So the 3 top ones were our original principles, and we've added one more. So I apologize, I'm going to read several of these slides. I know you can all read, but just to give you time to reflect. So to leverage global expertise and promote partnerships to support impactful research. Obviously, we're not a funder, but and funding has been a major deficiency. So much so that we in the coalition have written a letter to the Lancet complaining effectively about the difficulty with which low resource setting researchers had to obtain funding, despite all the talk. We want to promote open sharing of research knowledge and data, remove obstacles to timely research. Those obstacles, many of them of our own making, are bureaucratic and have been a substantial impediment to getting things done quickly. And we want to champion equitable and affordable access. We know that inequity has really been a rather unfortunate feature of the pandemic, and we really don't want, or do our best to try and avoid that in the future. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we would like to advocate for equitable clinical research funding. Next, please. So we'll have plenty of time for questions, and indeed, Nathalie can respond to the questions for her particular presentation. Indeed, any of the other working group presentations. Plenty of time at the end to ask specific questions, but I'm just going to throw out now the general or the options that we have come up with for the future for you to discuss and debate and vote upon. So you have the interrelated cogs of the working groups depicted there. That's still going, that we still believe is the right way to operate as a coalition. And there are four, we think there are four different options for the future, which I'll now show you and laboriously read some of. So let's start with the first one, which is really to continue as we are. Next slide, please. So I won't read the last bit, the impact, but just to revise the pros and cons of remaining a focused COVID-19 coalition. So we've certainly been able to refine our focus, and a lot of knowledge has been gained about COVID. It hasn't gone away. It's still a serious threat. As you know, the Omicron variants, together with the increasing vaccine coverage, have made that the pathogenicity of the process is much less. But there's every reason to believe that new variants they are being emerging all the time, and it's quite possible that one or more of those could be dangerous again and could cause a resurgence of disease. So we still think it's relevant, and it is, after all, the thread that attracted you and others to join our coalition. There's a lot more work to be done, a lot more questions to be answered, and some might regard focus as a strength. Funders haven't so far, but it could be in the future. Against remaining as we are is that things have definitely moved on. There is the reduced viral pathogenicity, both a consequence of the virus itself and the increasing vaccine coverage. There's undoubtedly COVID fatigue. Most people are sick to death of COVID-19 and don't want to hear any more about it. It is unclear whether we can add value at this stage, and there are reduced funding options. Eventually, belatedly equitable vaccine access is not, well, it's not been achieved yet, but it's at least moved in the right direction, but there's still very poor coverage. So I think those would be the main pros and cons for this focused option. So the next option, which I must say is our preferred option, but there are four in total, and that is to expand our focus to embrace other infectious disease with epidemic or pandemic potential, and that could even extend as far as antimicrobial resistance. We can, in terms of pros, we can leverage the lessons that we've learned and experience that we've gained from the COVID pandemic, the successes and the failures. We've developed an adaptive research methodologies. Certainly the methodologies for drug and vaccine evaluation are applicable to other, at least primarily respiratory tract infections. We've, I think, got established convening power and representativeness. There isn't really another group that represents in an unbiased way the voice of low and middle income countries, or representatives thereof. Let's face it, most epidemics and pandemics do begin in low resource settings, and yet they often only gain international interest and funding when they affect high-income countries. It's likely to be the same research community. It could even extend to climate change, although perhaps that would be more in the third option I'm going to present. Against that, it's already pandemic preparedness is already a crowded field. Have we got anything to add? It is a fast moving landscape, and we could establish one particular area or establish in one area and find that we're redundant. It's a very broad brush. Where would we focus? Should we focus? And although both vaccine and drug development for COVID was relatively successful, even if deployment was not, that might not be the same for the other potential pathogens. Third, option, next slide, please, is an even broader canvas. And basically that includes all infectious disease and non-infectious diseases. It again builds on our existing experience. We can use the same problem-based approaches and the same issues to do with equitable access. It addresses the epidemiological transition. We know that non-communicable disease research is minimal in low-resource settings, and indeed, as illustrated by long COVID, non-communicable disease can be a complication of infectious disease. It could indeed cover climate change. It would embrace, or it would allow us to have a more broad and diverse membership, and it would allow us to use the same approaches that you've heard about this evening. Against that, it's really the criticism that it would be too diffuse. It would not be an attractive, for example, for funders, perhaps because it's just simply too big. And so this lack of focus could weaken this initiative rather than strengthen it. And if it's everything, then we will need a very broad range of technical expertise, which we may not have sufficiently. And we may end up just simply following the money, which we don't want to do. Lastly, for option 4 is not really to have a, next slide, please, sorry. So option 4 is not confined to disease areas. It's just a broader coalition to focus on leveraging and accelerating research driven by whatever the needs are of people in low resource settings, championing equitable access, data exchange, knowledge sharing, and so forth. It's needed. It would be based around building capacity and overcoming challenges in low resource settings, and particularly ensuring that there is good clinical trial, good clinical investigation practices, promoting those trials. It would allow a diverse and expanded membership, much as option 3 would, and more interdisciplinarity. Again, cons would be diffuse messaging, lack of focus, might, as with 3, being seen to be a weakness rather than a strength. If it's so broad, then we will need a broad range of technical expertise and resources. And again, it might be, I mean, we all need money, and the direction might become dominated by the funding. So those are the 4 options that we would like to put before you. Next, please. Yeah. So I believe that there it is. As this is for you to, you don't have to vote now, but you can vote at any time while we are discussing this. So if you have any points you'd like to raise, any questions you'd like to raise, I haven't forgotten the questions for Nathalie, but please raise your hand or put them in the question and answer. I'll just take while we're waiting for questions or points to be raised. I've got a question for me, which is, what would be the best definition of equitable clinical research funding in terms of the general population question, according to research capacity question or regions need question? My own view is that this would be needs driven. I think equitable clinical research funding means that you fund the research that is necessary to address the problem of an area, a region, and hopefully would have global implications, beyond that specific region. That would be my answer to that. I would like to request that you vote, and if you have any comments or would like to say anything about these 4 proposals, please put your hand up. Meanwhile, Nathalie, I think you have 2 questions. Would you like to respond to those while people are thinking of their questions?
Thanks, Nick. I think I responded in the chat, but I would like to ask Maureen if she thinks I have responded to all the questions. Thanks.
I believe you did.
I mean, I can read the
Looks
question.
like you're off the hook then, Nathalie, unless you'd like to add anything.
Sorry, yeah. Back to you.
Okay. All right. We haven't got any questions or any comments that people would like to raise at this stage. So rather than, I mean, I don't think there is anything more to say than we would like to have your votes. Maureen, are we able to see the votes as they come in, or do we only see them at the end?
I can see them. I mean, I can end the poll now, but I think we should leave it open for a bit longer.
Okay.
Maybe in case people haven't quite decided yet. I can still see people are indecisive and the bars are still moving.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just to fill in the time, I was going to repeat briefly, blissfully briefly. So we have the option 1, which is just carry on as we are, and I see Juan Carlos is going to has raised his hand. Second is we broaden our perspective to other diseases of epidemic or pandemic potential. Third is we broaden it across the board, non-communicable as well as communicable diseases. And 4, more of a horizontal approach based on needs and opportunities, but not confined to particular diseases. Juan Carlos, did you have something you wanted to say?
Just to ask a question, Prof, to you. If you could expand a little bit on the difference and overlap between option 3 and option 4, because the way I see it, if you are extending from infectious diseases to non-infectious diseases, you got a lot of principles, I can say. So what could be the difference between option 3 and 4, please? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to ask if Patty Garcia could comment on that. I don't know, Patty, if you could respond to Juan Carlos.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
Hi.
Many thanks.
So the idea with number 4 is that we are not limited just to infectious diseases or emerging diseases, and that whatever structures, facilities, capacity, etc., that is created could help our countries to develop clinical trials on whatever area that is needed. I think the advantage of number 4 is that if we just focus on emerging diseases or on issues that will, like new pandemics, etc., we may not have anything to do in the interpandemic periods. And the idea with number 4 is that we could have the structure that could be dynamic into changing whenever it is needed to respond and to work in pandemic in one time and in non-pandemic issues in another time, and depending on the countries and depending on their needs. So that's basically why I was suggesting that this could be more open, and that could open also to other alternatives of funding. You have seen already the slide that talks about the pros and cons, but that's the idea. I don't know if that helps, Juan Carlos.
It's difficult for me to say. I was thinking aloud to say I would vote for option 34. I see a lot of overlapping between the two options, but maybe just me. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah. So basically, for
I already vote, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Option 3 is infectious diseases. Option 4 is, it's more, instead of talking about the disease-oriented issue, we are talking about developing capacities for clinical trials in general. So I don't know if that helps, but I'll stop.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Patty, and thanks, Juan Carlos. So just a rather mundane, pragmatic point is that clearly although we have now a home, thank you again, Nathalie and PANTHER, we do need to raise support for our initiatives. Not much, but we need to fund the Secretariat and so on. And so I think we have to also think about what we could fund and what could be supported. And I think Patty raised another very important point, which is the interpandemic period, which is, I completely agree. The option for that, I think, is, for example, COVID-19 is a respiratory tract infection. Respiratory tract infections are continuous, but there are epidemics and pandemics too, notably influenza. So I think in the interpandemic period for the infectious disease option, one would simply study influenza or other, RSV, other respiratory tract infections using the same experimental methodologies. And then you would have a platform that will be ready and operating and proven when the pandemics arrive. So any other questions? People are putting them in the chat, but here we are. I'm sorry, let me yeah, there's various comments. Are there any questions that people would like to raise? No hands are going up. Okay. Maureen, are we yes, somebody points out there are outbreaks all the time in Africa. There are outbreaks indeed in Asia too, and the Americas. All over the world, there are indeed outbreaks. Are we in a position yet to talk about the poll?
Yeah, I can show the result. I believe so. At the moment, 80% have voted. And you should see the result on your screen. Okay. Right. So last chance to vote now. See if you can topple option 2 or not. Or support it. So I think I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all, particularly the speakers, the working group representatives, the Secretariat, and you, the participants, for joining us. I think it's been very informative. It's very useful for us to hear, or for you to have the opportunity to direct us in the future. We will continue. We will continue in the form that you recommend in this vote, and we will continue, as we have done, to communicate with you via the newsletter and via other forms. I think communication with our membership is something we need to improve. So we'll think about how best we can do that. Please, if you are interested in any of these particular areas, do join us, do join the working groups. We very much welcome new blood. We do welcome new participants and new ideas. And I want to emphasize, we are a global initiative. We're very grateful to PANTHER with it, and it gives us strong links in Africa, very important links. But our ambition is to remain a global initiative. If there are no last minute points, I just want to make sure, Maureen, if there's anything else I should say. There will be, I believe, a questionnaire which we would like people to fill in. We've got most of the votes, and I guess if people haven't voted by now, then they've abstained. So, and we will circulate the formal results of this poll. Maureen, anything else I should say from a housekeeping or other perspective? No, I think you covered everything. Thanks to everybody who voted. We will, of course, communicate that afterwards as well. And if you leave this meeting, there will be a survey, and we would appreciate if you took 2 minutes just to provide some feedback that helps us to improve future events. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, yet again, thanks everyone.
good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.